The cold came first. Not sudden, not violent, but patient. The kind of cold that settled into the bones of Michigan's Upper Peninsula and refused to leave. It erased edges, softened sound, turned the world into something distant and unreal. Snow fell in thick curtains across Lake Superior's frozen shoreline, piling against fences and trees and structures long forgotten by the living. Garrett Ashford stood at the window of his cabin, watching the storm build. He was 39 years old, though the mirror argued otherwise. The gray threading through his close-cropped hair had spread faster this past year, especially at the temples. His beard, kept military short out of habit, showed more silver than brown now. He was still broad through the shoulders, still carried himself with the economy of movement that came from 8 years as a Navy SEAL, but the weight had dropped off him. 83 kilograms on a frame built for 90. Hannah would have noticed. She always noticed. But Hannah had been gone 6 months. The cabin was small, clean, organized with a precision that spoke of discipline rather than comfort. Boots lined up exactly parallel to the door. Firewood stacked in perfect rows. The bed made with hospital corners every morning, even though no one would see it, especially because no one would see it. These were the rituals that kept him functional, kept him moving forward when forward felt like the only direction left that didn't hurt. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a single photograph in a plain wooden frame. Hannah laughing at something he'd said, her dark hair catching sunlight. The photo had been taken 3 years ago, maybe 4, before the diagnosis, before the treatments that didn't work, before the drunk driver on an icy road finished what the cancer had started stealing from Garrett, even the chance to say goodbye. He turned away from the photo. That was another ritual. Look once in the morning, never again until tomorrow. Behind him, stretched across the worn rug in front of the fire, Kodiak lifted his head. The German shepherd's ears rotated toward the window, tracking something Garrett couldn't yet hear. At 6 years old, Kodiak was still powerful, still alert, but the years of military service had left their marks. A puckered scar ran along his left shoulder, where shrapnel had torn through muscle during his 3rd tour in Afghanistan. On cold mornings like this, the shoulder stiffened, made him favor his right side until the day warmed up. Garrett had adopted Kodiak from a military working dog rescue 2 years ago. The connection had been immediate, built on recognition rather than need. Both of them had served. Both of them had been retired before they were ready. Both of them understood what it meant to wake up every day and wonder what you were supposed to do with all the training, all the discipline, all the readiness that no longer had a purpose. "Just us today, boy," Garrett said, his voice rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken to another human in 3 days. "Standard patrol. Check the access road, clear any branches back before dark." Kodiak stood shook once from head to tail and moved to the door. No excitement, no bounding energy, just readiness. Garrett pulled on his heavy coat, wound a scarf around his neck, tugged a wool cap low over his ears. The thermometer outside read -12 Celsius. With the wind, it would feel closer to -25. The world outside was white and gray and silent. Snow fell steadily, not in flakes, but in frozen needles that stung exposed skin. The forest pressed close on 3 sides of the cabin, dense pine and birch, creating walls that seemed to absorb sound before it could travel. Lake Superior lay a quarter-mile to the north, that its surface locked under ice thick enough to walk on, though Garrett never did. Something about the lake in winter unnerved him. All that frozen power, all that weight pressing down on deep water that never stopped moving beneath. They set out along the tree line, Garrett's boots crunching through snow that had already covered this morning's earlier tracks. Kodiak ranged ahead, never more than 20 feet away, his black and tan coat stark against the white. His movement was efficient, economical. No wasted energy. Every few minutes, he would pause, test the wind catalog sense Garrett would never detect. This was their routine, had been for 2 years. A patrol that served no tactical purpose, protected no perimeter, accomplished nothing except filling the hours between dawn and dusk. Garrett told himself it was practical. Someone needed to check the access road. Someone needed to clear fallen branches before they blocked the path. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. Walking kept him sane. Routine kept him functional. And Kodiak's presence kept him from feeling completely alone in a world that had taken everyone who mattered. The forest was different in winter. Quieter but not peaceful. The silence had weight to it, texture. Garrett could hear his own breathing, the creak of his coat, the faint whistle of wind through bare branches. In summer, this place hummed with life. Birds, insects, the rustle of small animals moving through underbrush. But winter stripped all that away, left only the essential sounds. Survival sounds. They were a mile from the cabin when Kodiak stopped. Not a gradual halt, but sudden. Complete, his head came up, ears forward, every muscle in his body going rigid. Garrett felt his own body respond before his mind caught up, hand dropping to his hip, where a sidearm would have been if he were still on deployment. The gesture was automatic muscle memory from years of training. But there was no weapon, just cold air and falling snow, and a dog whose instincts had never been wrong. "What is it?" Garrett asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Old habits." When Kodiak went alert like this, you went quiet. You listened. The dog didn't look back. His nostrils flared, pulling in scent. His tail had dropped, not in fear, but in focus. A low sound vibrated in his chest, something between a whine and a warning. It was a sound Garrett had heard before in places where the air smelled like brass and blood and burning plastic. It meant danger. It meant something was wrong. The scent reached Garrett seconds later. Faint, carried unevenly through the storm. Not blood, not exactly, but distress. The cold metallic edge that living things gave off when they were dying. His spine straightened, his breathing slowed. The world narrowed to this moment, this information, this decision. Kodiak turned west, took one step, then another. Then he broke into a run. Garrett followed without hesitation. Boots pounding through deepening snow lungs, burning as wind cut across his face. Kodiak was moving with purpose now, the stiffness in his shoulder forgotten. He knew where he was going. How Garrett couldn't say. But 2 years together had taught him to trust the dog's judgment over his own. The terrain grew rougher. Trees thinned as the land sloped toward an old property line marked by rotting fence posts half buried in drifts. Garrett's legs burned. His breath came in harsh gasps that crystallized in the air. But he kept moving, kept following the dark shape ahead of him because Kodiak had never led him wrong, and because something in that scent, that metallic tang of suffering, had woken something in Garrett that had been sleeping for 6 months. Then the shed appeared. It was small, forgotten, the kind of structure that existed on the edges of property maps and in the vague memories of old-timers who might remember when it had been built. The roof sagged under the weight of accumulated snow. One door hung crooked on rusted hinges. The whole thing leaned slightly to the left, as if the ground beneath had given up trying to hold it upright. Kodiak reached it first, circling once with hackles raised, then planting himself at the entrance. He didn't bark, didn't growl, just stood there, body angled to block whatever was inside from getting out, or perhaps to block Garrett from getting in without preparation. Garrett approached carefully, heart pounding, not from exertion now, but from something older, something trained. His eyes scanned the area. Boot prints in the snow, mostly filled in but still visible. Recent, within the last 12 hours. Multiple sets. The tracks led to the shed, then away, heading south toward the old logging road. He moved to the door, put his hand on the warped wood and pushed. The cold inside was different, sharper, unnatural. The kind that settled where warmth had been denied too long. Garrett's eyes adjusted slowly to the dimness, and then he saw them. 3 German shepherds bound upright to separate wooden posts. Thick rope looped under their forelegs and across their chests, pulled tight, tied high. The knots were professional, deliberate, meant to hold weight without killing quickly, meant to restrain without leaving the kind of marks that would raise immediate questions. The first dog was nearest. Male, older, muzzle graying to white. His coat was black and tan matted with ice. His eyes were amber glass, dulled by exhaustion, but still watchful, still aware. He hung in the ropes with the patience of an animal who had learned long ago that struggle only made things worse. When Garrett stepped closer, the old dog's eyes tracked him, but he made no sound. No whine for help, no growl of warning, just watching, waiting. The second dog was to the right, female, younger, leaner. Her coat was lighter, more tan than black, and her left hind leg hung at an odd angle, toes barely touching the ground. The rope had rubbed her skin raw where it crossed her shoulders. Dried blood crusted dark against pale fur. She watched Garrett with an intelligence that hadn't yet learned despair. Her head was up, her ears forward, reading him, deciding if he was another threat or something different. The third dog was smallest, female, barely 2 years old by the look of her. She hung between the other two, head down, breathing shallow and uneven. Her coat was darker black with tan points, but frost had turned it white in patches. Her eyes were closed, lashes crusted with ice. The fine tremor running through her body had nothing to do with fear anymore. This was the body's last argument with cold. This was hypothermia reaching its final stages. For a fraction of a second, Garrett didn't move, couldn't move. The anger that surged through him was clean and precise, stripped of noise. The kind that sharpened focus instead of clouding it. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't someone who forgot to close a gate or failed to bring dogs inside before a storm. This was deliberate, This was execution dressed up as exposure. Someone had brought these dogs here, tied them with professional knots, and walked away knowing the blizzard would finish the job. He crossed the space in 3 strides, pulling the knife from his belt. The blade was 4 inches of carbon steel kept sharp enough to shave with. He cut the first rope with a single clean stroke, catching the old dog's weight as the tension released. The dog sagged against him, letting out a soft sound that might have been relief or might have been pain. Garrett eased him down carefully, mindful of joints that had been held in one position for too long. "Easy," he murmured. "I've got you." The second dog flinched when her rope gave way, but she stayed conscious, eyes locked on Garrett's face, tracking his movements, learning his smell, deciding whether to trust. The third dog barely reacted at all. Her body was frighteningly light in Garrett's arms. He could feel her heartbeat, faint and irregular, fluttering like a moth caught in a jar. Behind him, Kodiak moved, not barking, not making noise, just positioning himself between the open doorway and the cluster of dogs on the floor. Standing guard, blocking anything outside from reaching them. It was instinct, training, loyalty, all compressed into one simple action. Protect the vulnerable. Hold the line. Garrett wrapped his coat around the smallest dog, pressing his gloved hand against her chest. The heartbeat was there, but it was failing, slowing. He had minutes, maybe, not long. "Stay with me," he said quietly, though he didn't know if she could hear. "You stay with me." He looked up at the other two dogs, the old male, the injured female, both watching him with eyes that held too much understanding. They knew what was happening, knew they were dying, but they weren't giving up. Not yet. Garrett made his decision in the space between heartbeats. He gathered the smallest dog closer, then turned to Kodiak. "Lead us home, fast as you can." The storm was worse on the way back. Wind had picked up, driving snow horizontal, turning the world into a white blur that erased landmarks and swallowed distance. Garrett moved by instinct and trust, following Kodiak's dark shape through the whiteness. The old male dog struggled behind him, stubborn, head high despite exhaustion. The injured female limped alongside, favoring her damaged leg but refusing to stop. And in Garrett's arms, wrapped in his coat, the smallest dog's heartbeat kept fluttering, kept fighting. The cabin emerged from the storm like a promise the world wanted to break. Garrett kicked the door open, carried the small dog straight to the fireplace, laid her on the blankets he'd left there this morning. Kodiak herded the other two inside, then took up position near the door, watching, waiting. Garrett's hands moved automatically, running through procedures he'd learned in the field medicine courses a decade ago. Check airways, check circulation, assess core temperature. The small dog's body was cold, so cold, her breathing barely moved her ribs, but she was still alive, still fighting. He built up the fire, careful not to make it roar. Too much heat, too fast, could kill her as surely as the cold. He used chemical warmers from his emergency kit, placed them carefully near her core, wrapped her in layers of blankets. He checked the other two dogs, found the old male suffering from severe hypothermia and joint pain, found the young female's leg was broken, swollen, infected, where the rope had rubbed through skin. For the next 2 hours, Garrett worked. He cleaned wounds. He stabilized the broken leg with splints made from kindling and strips of cloth. He massaged circulation back into stiff limbs, counting breaths, monitoring heart rates, using every skill he'd ever learned about keeping living things alive in hostile conditions. And slowly, incrementally, it worked. The old male's breathing steadied, color returned to his gums. The injured female let Garrett touch her leg without flinching, some deep instinct telling her he was trying to help. And the smallest dog, the one who'd been closest to death, opened her eyes, just for a moment, just long enough to look at Garrett with eyes that held a question so quiet it felt sacred. "Are you real?" Garrett leaned forward, careful not to crowd her, his voice softer than he intended. "Hey," he whispered. "You're okay. You're here." She blinked once slowly. Her gaze shifted to Kodiak, confirming the warmth beside her, then back to Garrett as if choosing to believe. Something in Garrett's chest loosened, just a thread, just enough to let air back in. He sat back on his heels, hands shaking with exhaustion, and something else, something he'd kept locked away for 6 months. The storm kept hammering the walls outside, indifferent and relentless. But inside the cabin, something had shifted. 4 dogs breathing, 4 hearts beating, a stranger's presence filling the space that had been empty for so long. Kodiak settled beside the smallest dog, his flank pressed against her ribs, his head angled so his breath warmed the thin fur at her neck. The posture was calm but vigilant, a sentry who refused to sleep because the night didn't deserve trust. Garrett looked at them, all of them, the old soldier, the injured guardian, the fighter who'd come back from the edge. and Kodiak the veteran who'd chosen to stand watch over strangers because it was the right thing to do. And for the first time in 6 months, Garrett felt something other than grief. He felt purpose, responsibility, the weight of living things depending on him not to fail. He stood, went to the window, looked out at the storm. Somewhere out there, someone had done this, had tied 3 dogs to posts in an abandoned shed and walked away, had chosen cruelty with the same cold calculation a soldier might choose tactics. The rope had been professional grade, the knots practiced, the timing deliberate. This wasn't random violence, this was planned. Garrett's jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists. The anger was still there, still clean, still sharp. But now it had direction. He turned back to the dogs. "We're not done," he said, not loud enough for the wind, loud enough for the moment. "Whoever did this thinks you're disposable. They're wrong." The old male lifted his head a fraction. The injured female's ears twitched forward. The smallest dog's eyes opened again, holding Garrett's gaze for 3 full seconds before closing. And Kodiak stretched beside her like a living wall of warmth met Garrett's eyes with perfect understanding. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, the fire burned steady. And Garrett Ashford, 39 years old, former Navy SEAL widower survivor, made a decision that would change everything. These dogs were staying, all of them. Not until they healed, not until he found them homes, just staying because walking away was no longer possible. Because turning his back on something vulnerable had stopped being an option the moment he cut those ropes. Because somewhere in the space between Hannah's death and this frozen moment, Garrett had learned that surviving wasn't the same as living, and living required caring even when caring invited loss. He pulled a chair close to the fire and sat down. The dogs rested. Kodiak kept watch. And Garrett stayed awake through the night, listening to 4 sets of breathing, feeling the cabin grow warm, understanding with absolute clarity that this was the moment his life started moving forward again, instead of just continuing. Dawn came slowly reluctant, washing the world in pale gray light that made the snow glow. The storm had passed. The air was still. Garrett stood stiffly, joints protesting, hours in the chair, and looked at the dogs. All 4 were sleeping now. Real sleep, not the exhausted semi-consciousness of hypothermia. The old male's chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. The injured female had curled protectively around her damaged leg, but her face was relaxed. The smallest dog lay tucked against Kodiak's side, her breathing finally even and strong. Garrett moved quietly to the kitchen, started coffee, made himself eat, because he needed fuel for what came next. He couldn't keep doing this alone. These dogs needed professional care. The injured female needed x-rays, possibly surgery. The smallest dog needed monitoring for complications. And Garrett needed answers. He pulled out his phone, stared at it for a long moment, then dialed a number he hadn't called in months. It rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered. "Whitmore Veterinary, this is Evelyn." "Dr. Whitmore," Garrett said, his voice rough from the long night. "It's Garrett Ashford. I need your help." There was a pause. Evelyn Whitmore was 68 years old, had been practicing veterinary medicine in the Upper Peninsula for 40 years, and had a reputation for 2 things: exceptional skill and zero tolerance for wasted time. "Garrett," she said finally, "I haven't heard from you since you adopted Kodiak. What's wrong?" "I found 3 German shepherds," Garrett said, "tied up in an abandoned shed, left to die in the storm. They're alive, but they need help. Can you come?" Another pause. Shorter this time. "Give me your address. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Garrett gave her directions and hung up. He looked at the dogs again, at Kodiak, who was awake now, watching him with those dark, intelligent eyes, at the 3 strangers who'd survived a night that should have killed them. "Help's coming," Garrett said. To them, to himself, to the empty cabin that was empty no longer. He went to the window and looked out at the forest. The snow was pristine, untouched, except for the tracks he and Kodiak had made last night. Somewhere out there was the shed, and somewhere beyond that was whoever had done this. Garrett's hands tightened on the window frame. He wasn't a detective, wasn't a cop, wasn't even active duty anymore. He was just a man trying to survive grief in a cabin too quiet and days too long. But he had been a SEAL, had been trained to track, to hunt, to find answers when answers were buried deep. And whoever had tied these dogs, whoever had walked away and left them to freeze, had made one critical mistake. They'd left them alive long enough for Kodiak to find them. And that meant there was a trail. Evidence. Answers. Garrett turned from the window as headlights cut through the morning gray. Dr. Evelyn Whitmore's truck pulled up to the cabin, tires crunching in fresh snow. She climbed out, tall and straight-backed, despite her years, silver hair pulled into a practical bun medical bag already in hand. Garrett opened the door before she could knock. Evelyn stopped, took in his appearance, the exhaustion, the tension, the way his eyes kept flicking back toward the fireplace. She didn't ask if he was okay. She just nodded once and stepped inside. "Show me," she said, and Garrett did. "Doctor." Evelyn Whitmore moved through Garrett's cabin with the efficiency of someone who had spent 40 years responding to emergencies. She knelt beside the smallest dog first, her weathered hands gentle as they palpated ribs, checked gum color, listened to heart and lungs through a stethoscope that had seen decades of service. "Body temperature is still low," she said, her voice calm and clinical. 36.8 Celsius. She's not out of danger yet. She looked up at Garrett. "But you did everything right. The slow warming, the chemical heat packs. If you'd brought her to a fire too hot, too fast, you would have killed her." Garrett nodded. He'd learned that in field medicine training. Hypothermia victims needed controlled rewarming. Rush it, and their heart would stop. Evelyn moved to the injured female next. "This is Willow," Garrett found himself saying, though he hadn't planned to name them. The word just came out. Evelyn glanced at him, but said nothing, turning her attention to the dog's swollen leg. "Fractured tibia," she said after a careful examination. "At least 2 weeks old, maybe 3. It tried to heal on its own, but the bone set crooked. She'll need surgery to reset it properly." She paused, fingers tracing the raw wounds where rope had cut through fur and skin. "These abrasions are infected. She needs antibiotics, strong ones." The old male was last. "Colonel," Garrett said, and this time Evelyn did look at him, one eyebrow raised slightly. "You're keeping them," she said. Not a question. "Yes," Evelyn returned to her examination. "Severe hypothermia, arthritis in both hips and the left shoulder. Malnutrition, he's 9, maybe 10 years old." She sat back on her heels. "He's been a working dog. You can see it in how he holds himself. Even exhausted, even after what he's been through, he's still trying to be on duty." Garrett saw it. The way Colonel's eyes tracked every movement. The way his head stayed up, despite the pain it must have cost him. This dog had been trained, had been someone's partner, had served, and someone had tied him to a post and left him to freeze. "The smallest one," Garrett said. "Does she have a name?" "You tell me," Evelyn replied, packing away her stethoscope. "You're the one naming them." Garrett looked at the small dog still curled against Kodiak's warmth. She'd opened her eyes twice now. Twice she'd looked at him and chosen to keep fighting. "Ember," he said quietly. Evelyn stood, brushed dog hair from her knees. "Ember needs monitoring for the next 72 hours. Any complications from hypothermia usually show up in the first 3 days. Willow needs surgery within the week, or that leg will never heal right. Colonel needs pain management and a diet plan to get weight back on him safely." She pulled a prescription pad from her bag, started writing. "I'll give you antibiotics for Willow, anti-inflammatories for Colonel, instructions for Ember's care." She tore off the pages, handed them to Garrett. "But Garrett, this is going to be expensive. 3 dog surgery medications, follow-up care. We're talking thousands of dollars." "I'll manage," Garrett said. Evelyn studied him. She was a tall woman, had to be close to 5'10", and she had the kind of presence that came from decades of making life and death decisions. Her gray-green eyes missed very little. "You live alone," she said. "Work part-time doing forest maintenance. This cabin is rented, not owned. You drive a 15-year-old truck." She paused. "I'm not judging your choices, Garrett. I'm asking if you've thought this through." "I have." "Have you?" Evelyn's voice was gentle but firm. "Or are you just trying to save something because you couldn't save Hannah?" The words landed like a physical blow. Garrett's jaw tightened. For a long moment he didn't speak. Couldn't speak. Behind him, Kodiak rose to his feet, sensing the tension. "That's not fair," Garrett said finally. "No," Evelyn agreed, "but it's honest." She set her medical bag down, moved to the window. "I lost my husband 5 years ago. Heart attack. Dropped dead in the barn while feeding horses. I found him 3 hours later." She didn't turn around. "For 6 months after I took every emergency call that came in. Middle of the night didn't matter. Barely slept, barely ate, threw myself into work because if I stopped moving, I'd have to feel everything I was running from." She turned to face Garrett. "My daughter finally sat me down and asked if I was trying to save animals or trying to save myself. I didn't have a good answer." Garrett looked at the 3 dogs. At Ember, barely alive 12 hours ago. At Willow, watching him with those intelligent eyes. At Colonel, still on guard even in his exhaustion. "Maybe it's both," he said quietly. Evelyn considered this. Then she nodded. "Maybe it is." She picked up her bag. "I'll come back tomorrow to check on them. In the meantime, keep Ember warm. Make sure they all drink water, even if you have to use a syringe to get it into them. And Garrett, she paused at the door. Call me if anything changes. Anything. After she left, Garrett sat in the chair by the fire. Kodiak returned to his position beside Ember. Colonel rested with his chin on his paws. Willow had fallen into real sleep, the kind that came when pain finally eased enough to allow it. The cabin was quiet except for the crackling fire and the sound of breathing. 4 dogs, 1 man, all of them survivors of different wars. Garrett's mind turned to the shed, to the rope, to the professional knots and the boot prints in the snow. Evelyn's medications and instructions were necessary, vital even. But they weren't enough. Someone had done this. Someone had decided these 3 lives were worth less than the effort of finding them homes or even the cost of humane euthanasia. He stood moved to the small desk in the corner, pulled out a notepad, started writing down what he remembered. The type of rope, industrial-grade plastic-coated steel core. The knots, bowline variations tied by someone who knew what they were doing. The boot prints, size 11 or 12 treaded pattern consistent across all the prints he'd seen. Then he remembered something else. When he'd cut the ropes away, there'd been a scrap of something caught in the fibers. He'd shoved it in his pocket without thinking. Garrett pulled out his coat, searched the pockets, found it. A torn piece of vinyl, maybe 2 inches square. One side was printed with partial letters. Ter Ken was all that remained. Kennel. This had come from a kennel. Garrett sat down, opened his laptop. The internet connection was slow this far out, but it worked. He searched for kennels in the Upper Peninsula. Dozens of results. He narrowed it down to those within 50 miles. Still too many. He tried a different approach. Search for kennels that had closed recently. That list was shorter. 3 in the past year. He clicked through their websites looking for anything that matched. The third one stopped him cold. Cutter Kennel, professional breeding and training services. The website was bare bones, hadn't been updated in months. But there in the corner of one photo, Garrett could see a stack of vinyl signs leaning against a wall. The font matched the scrap in his hand. Randall Cutter. The name meant nothing to Garrett, but a quick search pulled up a business registration. The kennel had operated for 12 years, then filed for closure 4 months ago. No explanation given. Garrett leaned back in his chair. 4 months ago, right around the time these dogs would have been taken if they'd been tied up and left recently. The timeline fit. He looked at Colonel Willow and Ember. Professional breeding operation. 3 German shepherds. All of them showed signs of training, of discipline. They weren't pets. They were working dogs. Or they had been. A knock at the door pulled Garrett from his thoughts. Kodiak's head came up, but he didn't growl. Whoever was outside the dog didn't consider them a threat. Garrett opened the door to find Vernon Pike standing on the porch, snow dusting his coat. Vernon was 62, had lived in the area his whole life, worked the mines until they closed, and then worked odd jobs to survive. He was compact and weathered, with a face that had been shaped by hard work and harder winters. Heard you had some excitement, Vernon said, stamping snow from his boots. Evelyn stopped by my place on her way back to town. Said you found some dogs in trouble. News travels fast, Garrett said, always does out here. Vernon peered past Garrett into the cabin. Mind if I come in? Got something you should know. Garrett stepped aside. Vernon entered, nodded respectfully toward the dogs, then turned to Garrett with an expression that was part concern, part anger. That kennel you're probably already looking into, Vernon said without preamble. Cutter's place. It wasn't what he claimed it was. Garrett's attention sharpened. What do you mean? Vernon pulled off his cap, worried it between his hands. My nephew, he's a deputy over in Marquette County. He told me off the record, mind you, that they've been watching Cutter for 2 years. Suspected he was running something on the side. Not breeding for families or police departments. Something else. What kind of something else? Vernon met Garrett's eyes. Fighting dogs. There's a circuit runs through Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Illegal as hell, but profitable if you know the right people. They breed dogs specifically for it. Train them young, the ones that don't have the temperament for fighting. He trailed off, looking at Colonel Willow and Ember. Their liabilities. Evidence. Easier to make them disappear. The anger that had been simmering in Garrett's chest since he found the dogs ignited into something hotter, sharper. Your nephew knows this and Cutter's still free. Knowing and proving are different things, Vernon said. They need evidence, witnesses, a case that'll hold up in court. Right now, all they have is suspicion and rumors. He paused. But if those dogs came from Cutter's operation, if they've got microchips or registration papers, that's evidence. That's a thread they can pull. Garrett turned to look at the ding. Evelyn didn't mention checking for chips. She wouldn't have. Not on the first emergency visit, but it's standard procedure for any vet visit. Vernon put his cap back on. I'm heading into town tomorrow. I can swing by Evelyn's office, ask her to check. Quiet like, no need to spook anyone until we know what we're dealing with. Cutter will know they're missing, Garrett said. If he left them to die, he'll want to confirm they're dead. Probably already did, Vernon replied. Storm passed. He could have driven out there this morning, seen the shed was empty. Question is, does he know you have them? It was a good question. Garrett thought about the boot prints leading away from the shed. They'd headed south toward the old logging road. If Cutter had come back to check, he would have seen Garrett's tracks. Kodiak's paw prints, the disturbed snow where Garrett had carried the dogs out. He knows, Garrett said quietly. Vernon nodded. Then you need to be careful. Men who run dogfighting rings, they don't stop at animal cruelty. They're connected to other things, bad things. You start asking questions, you might not like the answers you get. I'm not asking questions, Garrett said. I'm keeping 3 dogs alive, that's all. Vernon studied him for a long moment. Hannah would be proud of you, he said finally. What you're doing here. Taking in strays, fighting for something that can't fight for itself. He moved toward the door, paused with his hand on the knob. But Garrett, don't mistake kindness for weakness. Men like Cutter, they see compassion as something to exploit. You watch yourself. After Vernon left, Garrett stood at the window and watched the old man's truck disappear down the access road. The forest was quiet. The sky was that peculiar gray that promised more snow. Everything looked peaceful. But Garrett had learned in 8 years as a SEAL that peace was often just violence waiting for the right moment. He returned to his laptop, started digging deeper into Randall Cutter's background. Property records, business licenses, any legal filings. What he found painted a picture of a man who'd stayed just on the right side of the law for over a decade, but barely. Complaints from neighbors about noise. Animal control called out twice, found nothing actionable. A lawsuit from a family who claimed a dog they'd purchased was aggressive, settled out of court. And then 4 months ago, everything stopped. No business activity, no complaints. The website went dark. Randall Cutter had closed up shop and disappeared. Except he hadn't disappeared. Not really. Men like that didn't just walk away from profitable operations. They adapted. They moved. They found new ways to continue doing what they'd always done. Garrett's phone buzzed, a text from Evelyn. Check my records. All 3 dogs have microchips. Registered to Cutter Kennel. I'm required to report found dogs to the registered owner within 24 hours. What do you want me to do? Garrett stared at the message. 24 hours. That was how long he had before this became official. Before Randall Cutter would be notified that his dogs were alive and in someone else's care. He typed back, "Can you wait? Give me time to figure this out." The response came quickly. "I can wait until tomorrow evening. After that, I'm legally obligated. I'm sorry, Garrett." Tomorrow evening, less than 36 hours. Garrett looked at the dogs again. Colonel had shifted, was now lying on his side, finally allowing himself to truly rest. Willow's breathing had evened out the antibiotics already starting to work. Ember was still curled against Kodiak, but her color was better, her heartbeat stronger. They'd survived the cold, survived being left to die, survived the night that should have killed them, and Garrett would be damned if he let them go back to the man who'd tried to murder them. He picked up his phone, dialed Vernon's number. "Vernon," he said when the old man answered, "that nephew of yours, the deputy, I need to talk to him tonight if possible." There was a pause, then Vernon said, "I'll make the call. Expect him around 8. Garrett hung up, checked his watch. 4 hours. He had 4 hours to decide how much he was willing to risk, how far he was willing to go, how much of his old life he was willing to resurrect in order to protect 3 dogs who'd become something more than strays in the space of a single day. Outside, the wind picked up. The first flakes of new snow began to fall. And Garrett Ashford, former Navy SEAL widower survivor, stood at the edge of a decision that would define everything that came after. The dogs slept. Kodiak watched. And the cabin, which had been a tomb for 6 months, slowly transformed into something else. A fortress, a sanctuary, a line in the snow that said not one step further. Deputy Silas Drummond arrived exactly at 8, driving an unmarked pickup instead of his patrol vehicle. He was 41, lean in the way of men who ran every morning, regardless of weather. His face was weathered but honest, the kind that hadn't learned how to hide what it felt. Vernon had come with him, made the introductions in Garrett's small kitchen, while the dogs rested in the main room. "Vernon says you found 3 German shepherds tied up in the old Miller shed," Silas said, accepting the coffee Garrett offered. "Says you think they came from Randall Cutter's kennel." "They're microchipped," Garrett replied. "Registered to him. Evelyn Whitmore confirmed it. Silas's jaw tightened. We've been trying to build a case against Cutter for 2 years. Every time we get close, evidence disappears. Witnesses change their stories. He's got connections, not just local, state level. What kind of connections? The kind that make investigations go away, Silas said carefully. There are 4 officers across 3 counties who we suspect take money to look the other way. Maybe more. Cutter's operation isn't just dogfighting, it's trafficking. Moving dogs across state lines for fights, for breeding, for God knows what else. But without hard evidence, without witnesses willing to testify, we've got nothing. Garrett felt something cold settle in his chest. These 3 dogs, they're evidence. They could be, Silas agreed, but the moment Evelyn reports them, found Cutter can claim them. He's the registered owner. The law's on his side unless we can prove abuse. And proving abuse means vet records, photographs, testimony. It means time we don't have. How much time do we have? Silas exchanged a look with Vernon. If Evelyn reports tomorrow evening like she's required to, Cutter will know by morning. He'll file a claim, show up with paperwork, and unless you can prove he's an unfit owner, a judge will order you to return them. He tied them up and left them to freeze to death, Garrett said, voice hard. How is that not proof? It is, Silas said, but we have to prove it. We need witnesses who saw him do it. Security footage. Something concrete. Right now, all we have is 3 dogs found in a shed. Cutter can claim they escaped, claim someone else took them, claim anything, and without evidence to contradict him, the law assumes ownership. Garrett's hands curled into fists. So what do? Vernon leaned forward. We buy time. Find evidence before Evelyn has to make that report. Where? Garrett demanded. Cutter's place has been shut down for 4 months. The building's still there, Silas said quietly. Empty, supposedly. But Vernon's right. We need evidence. We need proof that ties these specific dogs to abuse. And we need it fast. Garrett looked at both men. You're talking about breaking and entering. I'm not talking about anything, Silas said carefully. I'm a law enforcement officer. I can't condone illegal activity. He paused. But if someone happened to find evidence of animal cruelty and reported it to the authorities, well, that would be their civic duty. The implication hung in the air. Vernon cleared his throat. I'm an old man with insomnia. Sometimes I take drives late at night, see interesting things. Garrett understood what they were offering, what they were asking. They couldn't do this officially, couldn't risk their positions, their ability to help in ways that mattered. But they could look the other way while someone else did what needed doing. Where's Cutter's kennel? Garrett asked. Silas pulled out a phone, showed Garrett a map. 43 miles north, off Route 41 past the old quarry. Buildings set back from the road. No neighbors within 2 miles. He zoomed in on a satellite image. Main kennel building, storage shed, office. All locked up tight. Garrett studied the layout. It was isolated. Defensible if someone wanted to keep people out. But isolation worked both ways. I need tonight, Garrett said, to think about this. Silas nodded, stood. That's all any of us can ask. He handed Garrett a card with a personal cell number written on the back. If you need anything, for the dogs, for whatever, you call me. After they left, Garrett sat in the quiet cabin and looked at Colonel Willow and Ember. They were sleeping peacefully now. Finally warm, finally safe. Kodiak had moved to the door, was sitting at attention, staring out into the darkness like he could sense what was coming. Garrett had 2 choices. He could let the law take its course. Report the dogs found, hope that Evelyn's documentation and his testimony would be enough to prevent them from being returned to Cutter. Hope that the system worked, or he could take matters into his own hands. Could do what he'd been trained to do for 8 years. Infiltrate, gather intelligence, find evidence that would destroy Randall Cutter's ability to ever hurt another animal. It wasn't a difficult choice, not really. Garrett had stopped believing the system worked the day a drunk driver walked away from the accident that killed Hannah with nothing more than a suspended license. Had stopped trusting that doing things the right way guaranteed the right outcome. Sometimes justice required more than faith in broken systems. Sometimes it required action. He looked at his watch, 9:30. He looked at the mucks, at Kodiak still on watch, at the 3 lives he'd pulled back from death. Then he stood, went to the closet and pulled out a duffel bag he hadn't opened in 2 years. Inside were the tools of his old life. Night vision goggles, lockpicks, a tactical flashlight, climbing rope, a Glock 19 he'd kept despite knowing he probably shouldn't. All the equipment of a man who'd once been very good at going places he wasn't supposed to be and finding things people didn't want found. Garrett checked the Glock. It was clean, well-maintained. He'd kept it that way out of habit, even though he hadn't fired it since leaving the service. The weight of it in his hand felt familiar. Dangerous, like picking up a language he'd tried to forget but never quite could. He looked at Kodiak. "You think I'm making a mistake?" Kodiak tilted his head, considering. Then he stood, walked over, and sat directly in front of Garrett, waiting. "Yeah," Garrett said quietly. "That's what I thought." He began to prepare. Garrett left the cabin at midnight. The sky was clear for the first time in days, stars scattered across black like broken glass. The temperature had dropped to -18 Celsius, cold enough to make breathing painful, cold enough to keep most people indoors where warmth and sense lived. But Garrett had operated in colder. Afghanistan in winter. Mountain passes where the wind cut through gear that was supposed to be rated for Arctic conditions. He knew how to move in the cold, how to use it. Cold kept people complacent, made them trust their locks and alarms, because who would be crazy enough to be outside in weather like this? Someone with a reason. Someone with nothing left to lose. He'd left Kodiak at the cabin with strict instructions to guard the other dogs. The old military command still worked. Guard, stay, protect. Kodiak had understood, had taken up position between the 3 sleeping dogs and the door. Vigilant, unwavering. Garrett drove his 15-year-old pickup north on Route 41, headlights cutting through darkness, heater barely keeping the cab warm. He passed through the small town of Michigan without stopping, continued north into country that grew wilder with every mile. Fewer houses, fewer lights, just forest and frozen lakes and the occasional deer standing at the roadside, eyes reflecting red in the headlights. 40 minutes later, he found the turnoff. An unmarked dirt road, snow-covered but still passable. He killed his headlights, let the truck roll forward using moonlight to navigate. A quarter-mile in, he stopped, pulled off into the trees, and parked where the truck would be invisible from the road. Then he geared up. Night vision goggles hung around his neck, lock picks in his left pocket, tactical flashlight in his right, the Glock secured in a shoulder holster under his coat. He moved like he was suiting up for a mission, because that's what this was, a mission. Objective, gather evidence. Rules of engagement, avoid contact. Extraction plan, be gone before anyone knew he was there. The kennel building appeared through the trees. Single-story corrugated metal siding, flat roof heavy with snow. No lights, no vehicles. The windows were dark, some boarded over. The place looked abandoned, forgotten. But Garrett knew better than to trust appearances. He circled the perimeter first, staying in the tree line, watching. Looking for cameras, motion sensors, tripwires, anything that would indicate someone was still monitoring this location. 5 minutes. 10. Nothing moved. Nothing triggered. He approached from the north side where shadows were deepest. The main door was secured with a heavy padlock, industrial grade. Garrett pulled out his picks. This was a skill that degraded without practice, but muscle memory ran deep. 30 seconds. The lock clicked open. He eased the door inward. The hinges didn't creak. Someone had maintained them even after the place officially closed. That told Garrett something. This building wasn't as abandoned as it appeared. Inside, the air was different, colder than outside somehow, and stale. The smell hit him immediately. Dogs, fear, urine and feces, and something else. Blood, old and dried, but never quite cleaned away. His night vision goggles turned the darkness into shades of green. Empty kennels lined both walls. 20 of them. All the gates stood open, hanging crooked on damaged hinges. Garrett moved deeper into the building. The kennels themselves told stories. Gouges in the metal where dogs had tried to dig or bite their way out. Dark stains on the concrete floors. One kennel had scratch marks that went 3 feet up the back wall. Deep furrows that spoke of panic of animals desperate to escape. This wasn't a breeding facility. This was a prison. He found the office at the far end. The door was locked, but it was a residential deadbolt, easier than the padlock outside. 20 seconds and he was in. The office was small, cluttered. A desk covered in papers, filing cabinets, a computer, old, the kind that was probably bought used 5 years ago. Garrett pulled out his tactical flashlight, risked a brief flash of light to scan the walls. What he saw made his blood run cold. Photographs, dozens of them, pinned to a corkboard like trophies. Dogs in fighting pits. Dogs with injuries that should have killed them. Dogs standing over other dogs that hadn't survived. And in several photos, men, watching, betting, celebrating. Garrett recognized some of the faces, not personally, but types. Men who wore violence like cologne, who found entertainment in suffering. The kind of men he'd spent 8 years hunting in different countries under different circumstances. He used his phone to photograph everything. The board, the desk. He opened drawers, found ledgers, dates, names, Amounts of money that made this more than a hobby. This was a business. Hundreds of thousands of dollars changing hands over fights that lasted minutes and left animals dead or destroyed. One name appeared repeatedly in the margins. Not Cutter's. Someone else. Lieutenant Hollis, followed by phone numbers that changed every few entries. Garrett photographed those too. A lieutenant. Law enforcement. Exactly what Silas had warned him about. He was photographing the last page when he heard it. A sound outside, distant but unmistakable. A vehicle approaching. Garrett froze. His mind ran through options with the speed of training and experience. Hide. Fight. Run. The building had one entrance. If someone came in the front, he'd be trapped. But there'd been windows. Boarded over, but boards could be removed. He moved fast, back through the kennel area to the nearest window. The boards were secured with screws, not nails. He pulled out the multi-tool from his pocket, started backing out screws. Outside, the vehicle got closer. Headlights swept across the building's exterior. 4 screws. The board came loose. Garrett pushed it aside, squeezed through the window space. It was tight, his shoulders barely fitting. He dropped to the snow outside just as he heard the front door open. Voices. 2 men. One of them was angry. Garrett pressed himself against the building's wall below the window line and listened. "I'm telling you, I checked this morning. The shed was empty. All 3 of them gone." That voice was rough, irritated. Probably Cutter. "Then someone found them." The second voice was calmer, colder. "Question is who and whether they'll connect them to you. Nobody knows about this place. I shut down clean. All the records destroyed. Except the microchips," the second voice said. "You registered them to the kennel. If someone scans those chips and reports them found, it creates a paper trail." Garrett heard footsteps inside, moving through the building, getting closer to where he'd been standing moments ago. "I'm not going down for 3 failed fighters," Cutter said. "They were liabilities. Couldn't fight, couldn't breed, no good to anyone. Leaving them in that storm was the cleanest solution." "Except they didn't die," the second voice pointed out. "And now they're evidence. If they end up in the wrong hands, if someone starts asking questions, this whole operation gets exposed. So what do you suggest? Find out who has them. Quietly, then make the problem disappear. All of it. The D's, the person who found them. Clean." Garrett's jaw tightened. They were talking about murder. Casual as discussing the weather. "I've got contacts at Animal Control," Cutter said. "And that vet Whitmore, she's required to report found dogs. Give it 24 hours. We'll know where they are. And then we handle it, same as we handle everything." The voices moved away deeper into the building. Garrett didn't wait to hear more. He moved low and fast, keeping the building between himself and where he'd heard the vehicle. Made it back to the tree line. Paused there, controlling his breathing, watching. A pickup truck, dark blue, maybe 10 years old. No front plate. Rear plate covered in mud, deliberately obscured. 2 figures visible through the lit windows of the office. Cutter was the larger of the 2, heavy-set, moving with the aggression of a man used to intimidating others. The second figure was harder to make out at first, but when he turned toward the light, Garrett got a clear view. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, wearing a heavy jacket over what looked like tactical pants. The posture was unmistakable. Law enforcement or military. When the man's shifted light caught a badge clipped to his belt. State Police Shield. Lieutenant Derek Hollis. Had to be. Garrett raised his phone, zoomed, the camera captured both faces. Cutter matched the photos he'd found online. Hollis was tall, maybe 6'2", with the build of someone who still worked out regularly. Dark hair going gray at the sides. The kind of face that looked trustworthy. The kind of cop people would believe. They drove away 10 minutes later. Garrett waited another 15 to be sure they were gone, then returned to the building. He'd left through this window. He needed to secure it again so they wouldn't know someone had been here. The screws went back in quickly. From outside, the board looked undisturbed. Then he retreated to his truck, started the engine, let it warm while he reviewed the photos he'd taken. The evidence was damning. Photographs of fights, ledgers showing money laundering, names of people involved, and now recorded audio on his phone of Cutter and Hollis discussing murder. This wasn't just about 3 dogs anymore. This was a criminal conspiracy that crossed state lines and involved law enforcement corruption. This was bigger than Garrett, bigger than what one man could handle alone. But one man could start the avalanche. He drove back to the cabin mine, working through next steps. The evidence needed to reach the right people. But carefully, if Hollis was involved, then others might be too. Cutter had said contacts plural. That meant the corruption ran deeper than one lieutenant. The cabin appeared through the trees at 2:30 in the morning. Garrett Park killed the engine, sat for a moment in the silence. His hands were steady now. The mission was complete. Intelligence gathered. Objective achieved. He opened the door to find Kodiak standing exactly where Garrett had left him, positioned between the three sleeping dogs in the entrance. The dog's tail wagged once, acknowledging Garrett's return, but he didn't abandon his post. Garrett locked the door, checked the windows, drew the curtains. Basic security measures, because the conversation he'd overheard made one thing clear: these men would kill to protect their operation. And Garrett had just made himself a target. He sat down at his desk, uploaded the photos and audio to his laptop, created multiple backups, one to a USB drive, one to cloud storage, one emailed to an account he'd set up years ago for exactly this kind of situation. If something happened to him, if this went wrong, the evidence would still exist. Then he called Silas Drummond's personal number. It rang 6 times before a groggy voice answered. "This better be important," Silas said. "It is. I need to see you. Now, and you need to come alone." There was a pause. Garrett could almost hear Silas waking up, fully processing the tone in Garrett's voice. "Where? My cabin. Don't use your patrol vehicle. Don't tell anyone where you're going." "And Silas," Garrett paused, "I found something bigger than dogfighting. I'll be there in 40 minutes. Silas arrived at 3:15, driving Vernon's old pickup. He came inside, accepted coffee, and sat at Garrett's desk while Garrett showed him everything. The photographs, the ledgers, the names, the audio recording. Silas's face grew harder with each piece of evidence. When the audio played, Hollis's voice discussing murder, his jaw clenched so tight Garrett could hear teeth grinding. "Derek Hollis," Silas said when it finished. "State police, 22 years on the force, decorated, respected." He looked at Garrett, and corrupt as hell apparently. "You know him." "Worked a case with him 3 years ago. Interstate trafficking investigation. It fell apart. Key evidence disappeared. Witnesses recanted." Silas rubbed his face. "Now I know why. What do we do with this?" Silas was quiet for a long moment. "This evidence was obtained illegally. Breaking and entering, no warrant. I can't use it in court directly." He held up a hand before Garrett could object. "But I can use it to know where to look legally. I can get warrants based on anonymous tips. And I know someone who can help. FBI agent Patricia Reeves. She handles public corruption cases. This is exactly what she's trained for." "How long will that take?" "If I call her now, she could be here by morning. Federal warrants move faster than local ones, especially for corruption involving law enforcement." "We don't have much time," Garrett said. "Evelyn has to report the dogs by tomorrow evening. Once she does, Cutter will know exactly where they are. Then we move fast." Silas pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Patricia now. We get federal involvement, we get warrants, we move before Cutter has a chance to act." He paused. "Garrett, what you did tonight, I can't officially condone it. But off the record, you may have just broken open a case that's been killing us for years." After Silas left to make calls from his truck, where the conversation would be secure, Garrett sat with the dogs. Colonel had shifted in his sleep, was now lying on his side, finally allowing himself deep rest. Willow's breathing was even and strong. Ember was curled against Kodiak, her small body rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. They had no idea what was coming. No idea that their survival had triggered a chain of events that would either save them or destroy everyone involved in trying to protect them. Garrett's phone buzzed at 6 in the morning. Unknown number. He stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Mr. Ashford," a man's voice. Calm, professional. "My name is Randall Cutter. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Garrett's pulse stayed steady. Training kicked in. Never let them hear fear. "I don't know what you're talking about. 3 German shepherds, registered to my kennel. Dr. Whitmore was kind enough to inform me they'd been found. She gave me your name and address." So Evelyn had been pressured, maybe threatened. She'd held off as long as she could, but someone had forced her hand. "I found 3 dogs abandoned in a storm," Garrett said carefully. "If they're yours, you can file a claim through proper channels." "I'd prefer to handle this privately," Cutter said. "Those dogs are valuable breeding stock. I'm willing to compensate you for your trouble. Say $5,000 cash for your time and the veterinary bills. $5,000 to buy silence, to make the problem disappear. They're not for sale. Everything's for sale, Mr. Ashford. It's just a matter of price. $10,000 then. Final offer. Not these dogs." There was a pause. When Cutter spoke again, his voice had lost its professional veneer. "Then you're making a mistake. Those dogs are mine legally. I have documentation, registration papers, Breeding certificates. I will get them back. The only question is whether you cooperate and make some money or whether this becomes unpleasant. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You're a civilian. You live alone in the middle of nowhere. You have no legal standing to keep my property. I'll be at your cabin tomorrow at noon. I'll bring the documentation and the cash. You hand over the ducks, take the money, and we all walk away. Or you refuse and I bring law enforcement. Your choice. The line went dead. Garrett set down the phone. His hands were steady, his breathing calm. 8 years as a SEAL had prepared him for moments like this, when pressure mounted, when threats became real, when you had to decide who you were and what you were willing to fight for. He looked at Colonel lying near the fire, at Willow sleeping with her injured leg carefully positioned, at Ember curled against Kodiak's warmth, at the 4 dogs who had survived against impossible odds because one man and one dog had refused to walk away. Tomorrow at noon, Randall Cutter would arrive. He would bring threats and money and paperwork and the confidence of a man who'd never faced real resistance. But he was making assumptions. He assumed Garrett was just a grieving widower living in isolation. He didn't know about the evidence, didn't know about Silas and Patricia Reeves, didn't know that his midnight conversation at the kennel had been overheard and recorded. Cutter thought this was about property and legal technicalities. He was wrong. Garrett's phone rang again. Silas. Patricia's flying in from Detroit. She'll be here by 10. She's bringing 2 other agents and a federal warrant for Hollis based on the financial records you photographed. We're also getting a warrant for Cutter's property. Cutter called me, Garrett said. He's coming here tomorrow at noon, demanding the dogs back. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then we need to be there first. Patricia wants to meet with you this morning. Go over the evidence. Plan the approach. Can you be at the sheriff's office by 9? I'll be there. Well, Garrett, Silas's voice was serious. Bring the dogs, all of them. We keep them with us somewhere Cutter can't get to them. This goes sideways. I don't want them anywhere near your cabin. After hanging up, Garrett began preparing. He couldn't bring the dogs in his truck. Ember was still weak. Willow couldn't walk well on her injured leg. They needed transport care security. He called Vernon. I need your help, Garrett said when the old man answered. Can you take 4 dogs to the sheriff's office in Marquette? Keep them safe while I deal with something. The 3 you rescued plus Kodiak. Yes. Vernon didn't hesitate. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Garrett spent those 20 minutes getting the dogs ready. He'd bought a large crate the day before, had lined it with blankets. Colonel walked in on his own trusting. Willow limped in beside him. Ember needed to be carried, and Garrett lifted her gently, felt her small body trembling, not from fear now, but from the effort of healing. Kodiak refused to get in the crate. He sat at Garrett's feet, staring up at him with those dark, intelligent eyes. You need to go with them, Garrett said. Keep them safe. Kodiak didn't move. That's an order. Guard them. Protect. The dog's ears went back. He understood the command, but he also understood something else. That Garrett was preparing for a fight. That sending them away meant danger was coming. Vernon's truck pulled up. The old man climbed out, took one look at the scene and nodded. Kodiak doesn't want to leave you, Vernon observed. He needs to protect the others. Vernon knelt down, looked Kodiak in the eye. Your job is to keep them alive, soldier. That's the mission. You understand? Kodiak tilted his head, considering. Then he walked to the crate, looked back at Garrett once, and climbed inside. He positioned himself between the 3 other dogs and the crate door, ready to defend them from anything that threatened. Garrett felt something tighten in his chest. Take care of them. I will, Vernon said. You take care of yourself. After they left, Garrett stood in the empty cabin. It was quiet in a way it hadn't been since he'd brought the dogs home. The silence pressed in, familiar and unwelcome. For 6 months after Hannah died, this silence had been his constant companion. He'd almost forgotten how much he hated it. But this time the silence wasn't permanent. This time he was fighting for something that would fill it again. He went to his closet, pulled out the gear he'd packed away 2 years ago. Body armor, civilian grade, but effective. Extra magazines for the Glock, a tactical knife. Everything he'd kept from his military days, maintained out of habit, even though he'd never expected to need it again. He wasn't planning for a firefight, but he'd learned in 8 years of combat that plans changed. That being prepared was the difference between going home and going home in a box. At 8:30, he drove to Marquette. The sheriff's office was a low brick building on the edge of town, practical and weathered. Silas met him at the door, led him to a conference room where 2 people waited. The first was a woman in her mid-40s dressed in a dark suit, FBI credentials clipped to her belt. She had the kind of face that had seen too much and learned not to show it. Sharp eyes, steady hands, Patricia Reeves. The second was Vernon, who'd apparently decided this meeting required his presence. Mr. Ashford, Patricia said, extending her hand, thank you for coming, and thank you for the evidence. It's the break we've needed on Hollis for over a year. Garrett shook her hand. How much trouble am I in for breaking into that kennel? Patricia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Officially, I don't know anything about how you obtained this evidence. Unofficially, you did what needed doing. Sometimes that's how justice works. She spread the photos Garrett had taken across the conference table. Derek Hollis has been under investigation for 18 months. We suspected corruption but couldn't prove it. These financial records tie him directly to the dogfighting operation. The photos put him at the scene. And the audio recording, she played Cutter and Hollis's conversation about making problems disappear. That's conspiracy to commit murder. What's the plan, Garrett asked. We execute warrants simultaneously. My team hits Hollis's house and office at 10:30. Local police supervised by federal agents to prevent evidence tampering hit Cutter's property at the same time. We bring them both in before either knows the other's been arrested. Cutter's coming to my cabin at noon, Garrett said. Patricia nodded. I know. Silas told me. That's actually perfect. We let him come. We have agents waiting. He shows up to threaten you. We arrest him on the spot with witnesses present. It makes the case even stronger. You want to use me as bait. I want to catch him in the act of intimidation and attempted theft. But yes, that requires you to be there when he arrives, and Garrett considered this. What about the dogs? Cutter's going to demand them back. He has registration papers, which become irrelevant the moment we arrest him for animal cruelty, Patricia said. The dogs are evidence in a federal investigation. They'll be held in protective custody until the case is resolved. And given what Dr. Whitmore has documented about their condition when you found them, no judge will order them returned to someone facing felony charges. Vernon leaned forward. What if Cutter doesn't come alone? What if he brings Hollis or others? Then we arrest them all, Patricia said simply. I'll have 4 agents positioned around Garrett's cabin, unmarked vehicles. They'll move in the moment Cutter makes a threat or attempts to take the dogs by force. Silas cleared his throat. There's something else you should know. Vernon's been doing some investigating of his own. He nodded to the old man. Vernon pulled out a USB drive. Called in a favor from my nephew. He's been documenting suspicious activity around Cutter's operation for 2 years. Security footage from businesses near the old kennel. Traffic camera data. Nothing that would hold up in court on its own, but combined with what Garrett found. He plugged the drive into a laptop, pulled up video files. This is from 4 months ago, 2 weeks before Cutter officially shut down. The video showed Cutter's kennel at night. A truck pulled up. 3 men got out. They went into the building, came out 20 minutes later carrying crates. Dog crates. The truck drove away. We ran the plates, Vernon said. Trucks registered to an address in Wisconsin. Property owned by someone with 3 prior convictions for animal fighting. Patricia took the USB drive. This is good. This shows ongoing criminal activity even after the supposed shutdown. There's more, Vernon said. He pulled up another file. This one was timestamped 6 days ago. This is from a security camera at a gas station 40 miles from here. The video showed Cutter and Hollis getting into Cutter's truck together. The timestamp was 2 in the morning. The night before you found the day, Vernon said, looking at Garrett. The pieces clicked together. Cutter and Hollis had been at the kennel that night, had likely been the ones to transport Colonel Willow and Ember to the shed, had tied them up and left them to die in the storm. And Vernon had evidence of them together in the right location at the right time. Mr. Pike, Patricia said, you've just handed me everything I need to put both of these men away for a very long time. At 10:15, Garrett drove back to his cabin. Patricia's agents were already in position, invisible in the forest around the property. He'd been fitted with a wire, a small device taped to his chest that would record everything said. The cabin felt different without the dogs. Empty, but also cleaner, somehow. Like he'd stripped away everything non-essential and was left with just the mission. Protect the innocent. Stop the guilty. Simple mathematics. He made coffee. Sat in the chair by the fireplace where Ember had almost died 3 days ago. 3 days. That's all it had been. 72 hours since Kodiak had found those dogs. Since Garrett's life had tilted on its axis and started moving in a new direction. Hannah would have liked this. She'd always said he was at his best when he had something to protect, someone to fight for. That's why he'd been such a good SEAL. Not because he loved violence, but because he loved the people violence protected. At 11:45, a vehicle approached. Garrett stood, moved to the window. Cutter's truck, the same one from the gas station video. He wasn't alone. Two other men were in the cab with him. Garrett's phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. "We see them. 3 subjects. Stand ready." The truck stopped. Cutter climbed out first, followed by 2 men who had the look of hired muscle. Not cops, not military. Just men comfortable with intimidation and violence. But Hollis wasn't with them. That was interesting. Either Hollis was being careful keeping distance or he'd already been arrested. Garrett didn't know which. Cutter walked to the door. Knocked. 3 hard strikes. Garrett opened it, positioned himself in the doorway so they couldn't push past easily. "Mr. Ashford," Cutter said, smiling like they were old friends. "Right on time. I appreciate punctuality." "What do you want?" Cutter's smile faded. "I want my property, the 3 dogs you took from my shed." "I didn't take them from your shed. I found them tied up and left to die. There's a difference." "Legally, there's no difference. They're registered to me. That makes them mine." Cutter pulled out a folder, offered it to Garrett. "Registration papers, breeding certificates, all legal and documented. Now I'm offering you $10,000 for your trouble. That's more than fair." Garrett didn't take the folder. "They're not for sale, and you're not getting them back." One of the men behind Cutter took a step forward. Garrett's training assessed the threat automatically. 6'1", 220, moving like someone who'd done bouncer work. Dangerous in a bar fight. Not dangerous to someone with Garrett's background. Cutter held up a hand, stopping the man. "Mr. Ashford, I'm trying to be reasonable, but my patience has limits. Those dogs are valuable breeding stock. I've invested years in their training and development. I'm not walking away empty-handed." "You already walked away," Garrett said. "You walked away and left them to freeze to death. That ended your claim to them." Cutter's face hardened. "You can't prove that." "Actually, I can." A new voice spoke from behind the truck. Patricia Reeves stepped into view, FBI credentials held high. "Randall Cutter, you're under arrest for animal cruelty conspiracy to commit animal fighting and intimidation of a witness." 4 more agents appeared from the tree line, weapons drawn but pointed down. Cutter spun, eyes wide, calculating. The 2 men with him raised their hands, immediately smart enough to recognize federal agents. "This is harassment," Cutter said. "I came here to legally reclaim my property." "You came here to threaten Mr. Ashford into silence," Patricia said. She nodded to one of the agents who moved forward with handcuffs. "We have recordings of you discussing murder. We have evidence of animal fighting operations across 3 states. And as of 1 hour ago, we have Derek Hollis in custody, and he's very interested in making a deal." That hit Cutter like a physical blow. His face went white. "Hollis wouldn't. He already did." Patricia lied smoothly. Garrett recognized the tactic. Psychological warfare. Make the suspect think their partner had betrayed them, watch them scramble to save themselves. "He's giving us names, locations, financial records. You want to spend the rest of your life in federal prison? Or do you want to talk?" Cutter's jaw worked. Garrett could see the calculation happening. Weigh options, assess odds, decide whether loyalty or self-preservation mattered more. "I want a lawyer," Cutter said finally. "Smart choice," Patricia gestured to her agents. "Take him." As Cutter was led to an unmarked vehicle, hands cuffed behind his back, he looked at Garrett. The rage in his eyes was pure and undiluted. "This isn't over." "Yes," Garrett said quietly. "It is." After the vehicles drove away, Patricia stayed behind. She stood with Garrett on the cabin's porch, watching the forest return to silence. "Hollis was arrested at his home this morning," she said. "We found financial records, encrypted communications evidence of at least 17 dogfighting events over 4 years. He's facing federal racketeering charges. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison." "What about the others?" Cutter mentioned contacts. "People who helped him." "We've identified 6 other individuals involved in the operation. 4 law enforcement officers across 3 counties. 2 kennel owners in Wisconsin and Minnesota. Warrants are being executed as we speak." She paused. "This operation you stumbled into, it was bigger than we thought. Hollis wasn't just protecting dogfighting. He was running it. Cutter was middle management." Garrett absorbed this. "How many dogs?" "We've recovered 23 so far from various locations. More expected as we process evidence. Most of them are in bad shape. Some won't make it." Patricia looked at him. "But 3 of them are alive because you refused to walk past a shed in a snowstorm. That matters, Mr. Ashford. That matters more than you know." After she left, Garrett sat on the porch steps. The sun was high, the temperature had risen to -5. Snow dripped from the cabin's roof. Somewhere in the forest, a bird called. Life continuing, indifferent to human drama. His phone rang. Vernon. "They're asking for you," the old man said. "The docs, Kodiak especially, won't settle down. I think they know something happened. I'm on my way." The sheriff's office had set up a temporary holding area in a large conference room. Kodiak, Colonel Willow, and Ember were there along with Evelyn, who'd come to check on them. The moment Garrett walked in, Kodiak was on his feet. The dog crossed the room in 3 bounds, pressed against Garrett's legs, tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. "Hey, boy," Garrett said, kneeling down. I know, it's done. We're safe." Colonel limped over slower, but no less certain. Willow followed, and Ember, still weak but stronger than she'd been 3 days ago, let out a small sound that might have been joy. Evelyn approached, hands in her coat pockets. "Silas told me what happened. About the arrests." She paused. "I'm sorry I had to report them. The law requires—" "You did what you had to do," Garrett said, "and it worked out. Patricia used it to spring the trap. They're saying this could be the biggest dogfighting bust in Michigan history, possibly in the whole region." "It's not about the size of the bust," Garrett said, running his hand along Colonel's graying muzzle. "It's about these 3, and the others who will be saved because of this." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Patricia told me the dogs will be in federal custody for a few weeks while the case is built. After that, if no one else claims them—" She trailed off. "No one else will claim them," Garrett said firmly. "They're mine, all 3 of them. That's a lot of responsibility. 4 dogs. The medical bills alone, I'll manage." Evelyn studied him. "You know what this means? Taking on 3 traumatized animals with medical needs. It means structure, routine, care. It means you can't just disappear into grief anymore. It means showing up every day." "I know." "Good." She smiled a real smile. "Because I think you need them as much as they need you." 3 weeks later, the legal situation resolved exactly as Patricia had predicted. Cutter and Hollis both pled guilty in exchange for reduced sentences. 30 years for Hollis, 20 for Cutter. Neither would be eligible for parole. The investigation had expanded to uncover a network spanning 5 states. 14 additional arrests, 47 dogs recovered. Of those, 39 survived. 8 had been too damaged, too broken, and had to be euthanized. Garrett attended a memorial service organized by the local animal rescue. 8 small markers in the frozen ground. 8 lives that mattered. But 39 had survived, and 3 of them were coming home. Garrett had spent the weeks preparing. He'd cleared the old storage shed behind his cabin, winterized it, converted it into proper housing. 3 large kennels individually heated, a common area where they could socialize. Medical supplies, comfortable bedding. Vernon had helped. So had Judith and several others from town. The community had rallied around this project, seeing in it something bigger than 3 dogs. They saw redemption, second chances, hope. On a Tuesday morning in early February, Evelyn called. "They're ready," she said. "I'm bringing them home." She arrived at noon. Garrett opened the truck to find Colonel sitting tall despite his arthritis, Willow with her leg properly healed and splinted, and Ember curled in the back, sleeping peacefully. "Colonel's doing well on the arthritis medication," Evelyn reported. "Willow's leg will need another month of restricted activity, but it's healing straight. And Ember—" She paused, glanced at Garrett. "Ember has a surprise for you." "What kind of surprise? Come see." In Evelyn's clinic, Ember lay on a padded table. She looked healthier than Garrett had ever seen her. Coat glossy, eyes bright, and beneath the table in a special warming box, 5 small shapes moved. "She gave birth 3 days ago," Evelyn said quietly. 5 healthy puppies, all German shepherds, all strong. Garrett stared. "I didn't know she was pregnant." "Neither did I until the ultrasound 2 weeks ago." "She was already pregnant when Cutter tied her up." "Which means—" Evelyn let the implication hang. "Which means abandoning her wasn't just animal cruelty. It was attempted destruction of a pregnant animal." Garrett's voice was hard. "That's a felony in Michigan." "It is. Patricia has already amended the charges. Cutter's looking at an additional 5 years." Evelyn moved to the warming box, lifted out one of the puppies. It was tiny, eyes still closed, making small sounds. 4 males, 1 female, all accounted for and healthy. "What do you want to do with them?" Garrett looked at the puppies, at Ember watching him with trusting eyes, at the life that had survived against every odd. "We keep them," he said, "until they're old enough to be adopted. And we make sure they go to good homes, people who will treat them right. That's a lot of work, raising 5 puppies plus caring for 3 adult dogs." "I know." Garrett met her eyes. I'll need help. Evelyn smiled. I thought you'd never ask. I've been looking for a project. Something meaningful. I think this qualifies. Over the following months, the cabin transformed. The shed became Second Watch Haven, named for the military tradition of the late-night guard shift. When everyone else slept, someone stayed awake, watching, protecting, making sure nothing slipped through the darkness unnoticed. More dogs came. Word spread that Garrett Ashford took in animals no one else wanted, the ones too old, too damaged, too expensive to fix. He took them all. Not because he was wealthy, not because he had unlimited resources, but because he couldn't stop seeing Colonel and Willow and Ember tied to those posts. Vernon helped build additional housing. Judith organized fundraisers. Evelyn provided medical care at cost. The community that had been peripheral to Garrett's life became central to it. And slowly, the silence that had haunted the cabin since Hannah's death was filled with sounds of life. Barking, playing, the patter of paws on wood floors. The sounds that meant something needed him, depended on him, would die without him. 6 months after that day in the snow, Garrett stood in the common area of Second Watch Haven. It was early morning. The sun was just breaking over Lake Superior, painting the ice gold and orange. Around him, 11 dogs moved and played and existed in the safety he'd built for them. Colonel lay near the wood stove, content in his old age to supervise rather than participate. Willow had become the disciplinarian, correcting younger dogs when they got too rowdy. Ember's puppies, now 4 months old and nearly full-grown, tumbled over each other in a pile of energy and enthusiasm. 4 had been adopted to carefully vetted homes. The 5th, a male with Ember's eyes and Colonel's bearing, had stayed. Garrett had named him Legacy. And Kodiak, now 7 years old, sat at Garrett's side as he always had, watching, protecting, ready. Evelyn arrived with coffee and pastries from the bakery in town. She'd taken to stopping by every morning, checking on the days, discussing cases, planning expansions. She'd moved into a small house, 2 miles from Garrett's cabin, close enough to help but far enough to maintain independence. They'd never discussed what their relationship was, weren't partners in the romantic sense. But they were partners, bound by purpose and respect, in the shared understanding that some things mattered more than being alone. Got a call this morning, Evelyn said, handing Garrett coffee. 3 dogs abandoned in northern Wisconsin. Owner arrested for domestic violence. Dogs are at a shelter that's overcrowded. They're looking for placement. Garrett sipped his coffee, looked at the 11 dogs currently in his care. Calculated space, resources, time. The logical answer was no. He was at capacity, but logic had nothing to do with it. What kind of dogs, he asked. Mixed breeds, 2 adults, 1 puppy. The adults have some behavioral issues from the abuse. Shelter says they're difficult to place, which meant they'd be euthanized if no one took them. Garrett looked at Kodiak. The dog met his gaze, tilted his head, waiting for the decision he knew was already made. Tell them we'll take them, Garrett said. All 3, Evelyn smiled. I already did. They're being transported tomorrow. From inside the cabin, Garrett's radio crackled. He'd set it up to monitor emergency frequencies out of habit. A voice came through, crisp and urgent. All units, domestic disturbance in progress 4782, County Road M. Multiple dogs on property. Possible neglect situation requesting animal control. Backup. Garrett's hand moved to the radio before he consciously decided to act. Old instincts. When someone called for help, you answered. He looked at Evelyn. She was already moving, grabbing her medical bag. Kodiak, Garrett said. The dog stood immediately. Load up. They drove out together, Garrett and Evelyn and Kodiak, toward another emergency, another call for help, another chance to stand between the vulnerable and the void. Behind them, Second Watch Haven stood solid in the morning light. 11 dogs safe inside. More coming tomorrow. A mission that had no end date, no clear objective except to keep going, keep fighting, keep answering when the call came. As they drove, Evelyn said, You ever think about what Hannah would say about all this? Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, She'd say, I finally figured out what I was supposed to do after the uniform came off. And what's that? Keep serving, just in a different way. The truck hit the main road, turned north toward the address crackling over the radio. Behind them, the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. Ahead, someone needed help, someone vulnerable, someone who couldn't save themselves. And Garrett Ashford, 39 years old, former Navy SEAL widower survivor, was on his way. Because this was the mission now, not clearing buildings or extracting hostages, but rescuing the forgotten, protecting the disposable, proving that every life mattered, even the ones society had written off. Kodiak sat in the passenger seat, nose pressed to the window, ears forward. Ready, always ready. The radio crackled again. More details. More urgency. Garrett's hands tightened on the wheel. His heart beat steady and strong. And for the first time since Hannah died, he felt completely, absolutely certain of where he was supposed to be. The watch continued. The mission endured. And in a cabin by a frozen lake, 11 dogs slept peacefully, knowing that someone stood guard. Someone who wouldn't walk away. Someone who'd learned the hardest lesson of all. That saving others was how you saved yourself. That serving never stopped. That love in all its forms was worth fighting for. The truck disappeared around a bend. The sun climbed higher, and somewhere ahead, 3 more dogs waited for rescue, not knowing that help was already on the way. Not knowing that they'd been found. Not knowing that they were finally safe.